Could the Holocaust have been avoided? One of the most disturbing questions about the Holocaust is whether it was avoidable, or whether at least it could have been limited. Nations take care of their own people first, so helping others seems less important to them. In the early 1930s, during the Great Depression, Europe and the United States reeled from unemployment, soup kitchens and bread lines, and they wondered if life would ever improve. The last thing they wanted was a new group of hungry people to feed. With the situation bleak everywhere, immigration declined because people felt they could go hungry at home more easily than in a strange country. In 1929, 46,000 Germans immigrated to the U.S. Only 1,919 came in by 1933. By 1937, German immigrants was over 10,000 again, and it was 3,000 in 1939. There were, of course, other places German Jews could go, but "No immigrants welcome" signs were up everywhere. Unfortunately, the Jews who did escape Germany often fled to countries soon to be overrun. The responsibility for the Holocaust clearly falls on Hitler. His aim was clear from the first page of Mein Kampf to the death of his last victim in a death camp. No outsider could have persuaded him to change course. However, the outside world could have done more. European democracies could have stopped Hitler in his tracks if they had not tried appeasement, meaning giving in to demands. Anti-Semitism was strong in both Great Britain and France. Neither country made the Kristallnacht, which was the night of broken glass, a major issue. It was Hitler's land grabbing, not his cruel treatment of Jews, that finally moved them to action. The role of the United States. During the Anschluss, thousands of Austrian Jews lined up outside foreign embassies, hoping for visas to enter other countries, but their paperwork moved as slowly as ever. President Franklin Roosevelt called an international conference that met at Evian, France. Representatives from 32 countries and 20 Jewish and 19 non-Jewish refugee agencies met and talked about the urgent need to help Jews resettle. The Dominican Republic offered to take 500. No one else stepped up to offer any more than their usual immigration quotas. Hitler now knew that no one would step up to help Jews escape his plans. After Kristallnacht, Roosevelt allowed the 15,000 Germans and Austrians with visitor status to remain in the United States, but he did nothing more. The world should have known that intense pressure was being put on German Jews, but except for official protests and threat of boycotts against German-made goods, the attitude was generally indifferent. An example of that was the voyage of the ship St. Louis, which sailed from Hamburg in May 1933 with 900 German Jews on board. They had purchased entry permits from Cuba and hoped to eventually be allowed to enter the United States. When the ship arrived in Havana, the Cuban government refused to let them in, so the ship had to move on. Everywhere the St. Louis went, the passengers were rejected. Jewish organizations raised money and finally persuaded Great Britain, Holland, Belgium, and France to divide the refugees among them. Anti-Semitism and opposition to allowing more immigrants to enter the United States combined to keep Jews from coming. A Gallup poll shows that 80% of Americans oppose changing immigration laws. In August of 1943, a Polish diplomat, Jan Karski, met with Roosevelt. He told the president about the death camps in Poland. He wanted the United States to bomb railroads, gas chambers, and crematoria, but nothing was done. Part of the reason was that the State Department found a problem in every approach to helping Jews. The official handling refugee questions, Assistant Secretary of State Breckinridge Long, said communists and even Nazis might be smuggled in among any group of refugees. Secretary of State Cordell Hull told the president, "The unknown cost of removing an undetermined number of persons from an undisclosed place to an unknown destination is out of the question." A Treasury Department lawyer discovered that the State Department was hiding information about the Holocaust from the president and trying to cut off any new reports on the subject. Secretary of the Treasurer Henry Morgenthau talked to Roosevelt about the evidence in January 1944, and the president set up the War Refugee Board a few days later. It helped after the war ended, but it was of little use in saving millions of lives during the war. The suggestion that bombs be dropped on rail connections and gas chambers ran in opposition as well. In 1942, December, the Polish resistance sent reports about genocide, which is deliberate murder of a large group of Jews. The report was confirmed by the SS, forerunner of the CIA. So the OSS became the CIA. The Poles urged that railroads, gas chambers, and crematoria be bombed. The U.S. military refused because it would divert aircraft from bombing military targets, and they thought the best way to help concentration camp inmates was a quick victory in the war. The difficulties of reaching targets in Poland in 1942 had been solved by 1944. Desperate pleas from the World Jewish Congress, bombing was always postponed. Despite pleas from the World Jewish Congress, bombing was always postponed. Assistant Secretary of War John McCloy wrote in August 1944 that such an attack would require great air support, and even if it were practical, it might provoke even more vindictive action by the Germans. That same month, American bombers with fighter escorts flew over the railway to Auschwitz and bombed the synthetic rubber factory at Buna, 5 miles away. No bombs came near Auschwitz or its rail components. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill found the same reluctance in his military. The Royal Air Force and Foreign Office always found excuses not to act. The Foreign Office was more concerned about relations with Arab oil producers than the inmates of the camps. When the possibility of sending Hungarian Jews to Palestine was suggested, a British official asked, "What shall I do with 1 million Jews? Where shall I put them?" The responsibility for the tragedy of the Holocaust remains with Hitler and his Nazi henchmen, but the harm they brought to millions could have been reduced before and during the war. Prejudice is a disease that not only affects the mind, but the heart, eyes, and ears as well.